I thought my world had shattered the day my husband left, but I had no idea what betrayal truly felt like until it came from the people I called my friends. It was a Tuesday evening, ordinary in every way except for the storm brewing inside our home. My husband and I had been arguing for weeks, but that night something felt final. The words he threw at me felt heavier, sharper, as if they were meant to cut, not heal. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, while his voice echoed through the house. "This isn't working anymore," he said flatly, his face devoid of emotion. It wasn't a fight. It was a declaration. He had already made up his mind. My heart sank as I watched him pack a small bag. He didn't look back, not once, as he walked out of the door, leaving me standing in the hallway, clutching my chest like I could physically hold the pieces of my shattered heart together. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat on the floor of the living room staring at the empty space where his shoes used to be, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. Every corner of the house felt like a ghost of the life we'd built together, the life that was now gone. I wanted to scream, cry, or smash something, but I couldn't even find the strength to move. When my phone buzzed with a message from my closest friend, Monica, I felt a flicker of hope. I heard, "Come stay with us for a while. You shouldn't be alone." Her words were like a lifeline. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a suitcase and began stuffing it with clothes, barely able to see through the tears streaming down my face. I packed quickly, almost robotically, avoiding the photographs and mementos that would only amplify my pain. As I locked the door to my house, no, our house, it felt like I was closing a chapter of my life I wasn't ready to end. The drive to Monica's place was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing with questions. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? Where do I go from here? When I arrived at her house, Monica greeted me with open arms, pulling me into a tight hug. "You're safe here," she said softly, leading me inside. Her husband, Isaac, gave me a polite nod, offering to take my bag. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe this was the fresh start I needed. The first night at Monica's was filled with whispered reassurances. She sat with me in her cozy living room, a cup of chamomile tea warming my trembling hands. "It's his loss," she said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I wasn't the problem, that this wasn't my fault. In the days that followed, I tried to adjust to my new reality. Monica and Isaac were kind, always checking in on me and making sure I felt included in their home. They insisted I stay as long as I needed. "This is your home now," Monica would say, her tone so warm and sincere that I almost believed her. But as the weeks went by, small cracks began to appear, so subtle at first that I questioned whether I was imagining them. It started with little comments, offhand remarks that didn't sit right. One evening, as we were having dinner, Monica sighed and said, "You know, maybe if you had been a little more understanding, he wouldn't have left." I froze, her words cutting deeper than she realized. I laughed it off, pretending I hadn't just been stabbed with the very insecurities I was trying to bury. Then there was Isaac, whose behavior shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. At first, his kindness felt genuine. He would offer to fix my broken phone, insist on carrying my groceries, or encourage me to talk about my feelings. But soon, his gestures began to feel intrusive. He hovered in the kitchen when I cooked, standing too close as he reached for utensils. He commented on the way I looked, his words teetering on the edge of inappropriate. "You look much happier these days," he said one evening, his eyes lingering a second too long. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as harmless. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One night, as I was lying in bed, I overheard them talking in the next, in Bay, room. "How long is she planning to stay?" Isaac asked, his tone laced with irritation. "I mean, we're not running a charity here." "She just needs time," Monica replied, but her voice lacked the warmth it once held. "She'll figure it out eventually." I felt my chest tighten as I lay there in the dark, their words replaying in my mind. Was I a burden to them? Had I overstayed my welcome? I tried to push the doubts aside, but they clung to me like a second skin. The next day, I offered to help with the household chores, hoping to ease some of the tension I felt. But even my attempts to contribute seemed to irritate them. When I accidentally dropped a glass in the kitchen, Isaac snapped, "Can't you be more careful? It's bad enough we're picking up the pieces of your life, now we have to clean up after you too?" I stood there, stunned, as Monica laughed nervously, trying to defuse the situation. "He's just joking," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. That evening, as we sat in the living room, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Monica handed me a cup of tea and said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of everything for you. You don't need anyone else now." Her words should have been comforting, but instead, they sent a chill down my spine. The way she said it, the way her eyes lingered on mine, it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like control. I went to bed that night with a growing sense of unease. I had come to their home seeking solace, but now it felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to avoid their irritation or disapproval. The friends who once felt like family were starting to feel like strangers, and deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized the truth. The safety I thought I'd found was an illusion. I had lost my husband, my home, and now, the very people I had trusted most were beginning to betray me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. My world hadn't just fallen apart, it was crumbling, piece by piece, and I had no idea how to stop it. When I first moved in with Monica and Isaac, I thought I had found a safe harbor, a place to regain my strength after my world had crumbled. They greeted me with open arms, their warm smiles and comforting words wrapping around me like a blanket. "You'll get through this," Monica said, her voice full of conviction as she led me to the cozy guest room they had prepared. For a fleeting moment, I felt hope, that perhaps I wasn't as alone as I had feared. The first few days felt like a breath of fresh air. Monica insisted on taking me out for walks in the park, claiming that fresh air would help clear my mind. Isaac cracked light-hearted jokes at the dinner table, his laughter filling the awkward silences I didn't know how to navigate. They reassured me, time and again, that I was welcome in their home for as long as I needed. "Your family," Monica would say, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "And family takes care of each other." At first, I believed them. I let myself settle into their routine, quietly grateful for the stability they offered. I cooked meals as a way of showing appreciation, cleaned the house without being asked, and stayed out of their way as much as possible. I didn't want to feel like a burden, even though they told me I wasn't. "We're happy to have you here," Isaac said one evening, smiling as I set the table. I held on to those words like a lifeline. But as the days turned into weeks, the warmth I had felt in their home began to cool. It started with small, seemingly insignificant moments. Monica would make comments in passing, her tone light but her words stinging like tiny cuts. "Maybe if you had put your career first, things would have turned out differently," she said one morning over tea. "Men respect women who know their worth." I forced a smile, biting back the retort that sat heavy on my tongue. Was she blaming me for my husband's departure? Isaac, too, began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. At first, his kindness felt genuine. He would offer to fix my broken phone, insist on carrying my groceries, or encourage me to talk about my feelings. But soon, his gestures began to feel intrusive. He hovered in the kitchen when I cooked, standing too close as he reached for utensils. He commented on the way I looked, his words teetering on the edge of inappropriate. "You look much happier these days," he said one evening, his eyes lingering a second too long. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as harmless. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One night, as we sat in the living room watching a movie, I noticed Isaac glancing at me more often than he should have. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, pretending to be engrossed in the film. Monica didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she chose not to. The tension in the air was palpable, but I didn't know how to address it. After all, they had opened their home to me. How could I repay their kindness with accusations? The turning point came when I overheard a conversation between Monica and Isaac late one night. I had gotten up to get a glass of water, the house dark and silent except for the faint hum of their voices from the living room. I paused in the hallway, the words stopping me in my tracks. "She's been here for weeks," Isaac said, his tone sharp. "Does she even have a plan, or is she just going to live off us forever?" "She's going through a lot," Monica replied, though her voice lacked the warmth I had come to associate with her. "But you're right. It's time she started pulling her weight around here." My heart sank. I stood there, frozen, as their words echoed in my mind. Had I overstayed my welcome? Was I a burden to them after all? I felt a wave of shame wash over me, coupled with a growing sense of unease. They had made me feel safe, made me believe I could trust them. But now, their kindness felt like a facade, one that was slowly crumbling to reveal something far less comforting. The next day, I tried to brush off the conversation, telling myself I had misinterpreted their words. But the tension in the house became impossible to ignore. Monica began to micromanage my every move, her suggestions becoming demands. "Don't leave your shoes by the door," she said sharply one morning. "And can you stop using so much hot water when you shower? We're not made of money." Her tone was biting, her patience wearing thin. Isaac, on the other hand, grew bolder. One evening, as I was folding laundry, he walked into the room and stood by the door, watching me. "You know," he said, his voice low, "you're lucky to have us. Not everyone would take someone in like this." His words sent a chill down my spine. I forced a smile, mumbling a quick thank you before hurrying out of the room. The incidents began to pile up, each one chipping away at the fragile sense of stability I had tried to hold on to. Monica started making snide remarks in front of guests, casually bringing up my failed marriage as if it were a punchline. Isaac would find reasons to invade my space, his presence suffocating. I felt trapped, cornered in a place that was supposed to be my refuge. The final straw came one night when I overheard them laughing about me. I had retreated to the guest room desperate for a moment of peace when their voices carried through the thin walls. "She's so naive," Monica said, her laughter cutting through me like a blade. "Honestly, she should be grateful we're even letting her stay." "She needs to grow up," Isaac added. "She's acting like a helpless child." I clenched my fists, my chest tightening with anger and hurt. The people I had trusted, the ones who had promised to support me, were mocking my pain behind my back. It was in that moment that I realized the truth. They didn't care about me. They never had. I was just an inconvenience, a source of entertainment for them to dissect and judge. As I sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down my face, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Their home, which had once felt like a sanctuary, had become a prison. It was time to take control of my life, to reclaim the strength I had lost. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but one thing was certain. I deserved better than this. I thought I had prepared myself for the subtle betrayals, the snide comments, the uncomfortable glances, the unspoken resentment. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Monica and Isaac had crossed lines before, but now they shattered every boundary I thought they wouldn't dare touch. The betrayal didn't just cut deep, it tore me apart. It started with little things, small acts that felt almost inconsequential, until they piled up into an unbearable weight. Monica began taking my personal struggles and turning them into stories, anecdotes she shared with others as if my pain were entertainment. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I overheard her on a call with a mutual friend. She spoke about me as though I were a project she was managing, someone helpless and incapable of making her own decisions. "She's so lost," Monica said, her voice tinged with faux concern. "Honestly, I don't think she even knows what she's doing anymore. She's just a mess." I froze in the hallway, my breath catching in my throat. My chest tightened as her words sank in. I wanted to walk in and confront her, to tell her she had no right to speak about me like that. But I couldn't move. The weight of embarrassment and disbelief pinned me in place. I returned to the guest room that night feeling smaller than ever, my thoughts swirling with self-doubt. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was a mess. Isaac's behavior, on the other hand, had grown increasingly uncomfortable. At first, his comments seemed like harmless compliments, words meant to uplift. But soon, they became pointed, deliberate, and loaded with implications that left me uneasy. "You're so different from Monica," he said one afternoon as I folded laundry in the living room. "She's always so critical, but you're refreshing." I stiffened, pretending I hadn't heard him. His presence felt suffocating, but I didn't know how to respond without creating tension. Isaac's words began to linger in my mind long after he spoke them, each one a seed of discomfort that took root in my chest. One evening, as Monica prepared dinner in the kitchen, Isaac offered to show me how to fix a broken lamp in the guest room. I hesitated, but his insistence left me with little choice. As he stood close, explaining the wiring, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on me, the way his hand brushed mine unnecessarily. "You're lucky to have us," he said, his voice low. "Not everyone would do what we're doing for you." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Thank you," I muttered, stepping back and pretending to inspect the lamp to put some space between us. His words hung heavy in the air, a reminder that my stay here was not without strings. The breaking point came late one night. I had just settled into bed, exhausted from a day of walking on eggshells, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Monica standing there, her arms crossed, her expression colder than I had ever seen. "We need to talk," she said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaky. She sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Isaac and I have been talking," she began, her tone laced with irritation. "And we feel like you're taking advantage of us." Her words hit me like a slap. "Taking advantage?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "You've been here for weeks," she said, her gaze piercing. "And we just feel like you're not doing enough to contribute. Isaac and I are bending over backward to help you, and it feels like you don't appreciate it." I stared at her, stunned. I had cooked, cleaned, and done everything I could to avoid being a burden. "I've been trying," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to impose—" "Look," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "We're not saying you're a bad person, but it's time for you to start figuring things out. We can't support you forever." Tears pricked my eyes as I nodded, unable to form a coherent response. She left the room without another word, leaving me alone with the weight of her accusations. But the worst came the next morning. I woke up to find my suitcase in the hallway, my belongings haphazardly stuffed inside. Isaac stood at the end of the hall, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Monica and I think it's time," he said simply, his tone devoid of sympathy. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "For you to go," he said, his words cold and final. "We've done everything we can for you, but we have our own lives to live." The humiliation was unbearable. I gathered my things in silence, my hands trembling as I packed. They watched me from the doorway, their expressions unreadable. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to make them see how deeply they had hurt me. But I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing, my chest tight with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, my suitcase dragging behind me, I realized that I had lost not just a husband, but also the people I thought I could rely on. Monica and Isaac had crossed every line, exploiting my vulnerability, mocking my pain, and throwing me out when I was at my lowest. Their betrayal felt like a knife in my back, twisting with every step I took away from their home. But as I walked down the street, the tears streaming down my face, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a truth I hadn't yet acknowledged. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their fake kindness, or their toxic presence in my life. I had survived the heartbreak of losing my husband, and I would survive this too. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a glimmer of strength. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of determination. Monica and Isaac may have broken my trust, but they hadn't broken me. And as I walked away from their house, I promised myself that I would never let anyone cross those lines again. The cold morning air bit against my skin as I stood outside Monica and Isaac's house, my suitcase clutched tightly in one hand. My chest felt hollow, my breath shallow. Their final words echoed in my ears, words that would replay in my mind for days to come. They thought they had reduced me to nothing, and in some ways they had. For a moment, I didn't know where to go or what to do. My entire life had unraveled piece by piece. First my husband, then the home we built together, and now the friends I trusted most had thrown me away as though I was disposable. I walked down the street, dragging my suitcase behind me, each step feeling heavier than the last. My tears blurred the world around me, but a small voice inside me whispered, "Keep walking, don't look back." I found a quiet bench in a nearby park and sat down, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, searching for someone, anyone, I could call for help. But with every name I passed, I felt more alone. My pride wouldn't let me reach out to distant relatives or acquaintances. I had already been humiliated enough. Instead, I sat there, staring at the trees swaying gently in the wind, trying to convince myself that I could do this. You've made it this far. Don't give up now. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I stood up, wiped my face, and decided to take the first step toward rebuilding my life. I found a small, affordable hotel to stay in for the night, using what little savings I had left to pay for a room. It wasn't much, just a bed and a tiny bathroom, but it was mine. No judgmental stares, no suffocating comments, and no one trying to control me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of peace. That night, as I lay in the dimly lit room, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I thought about everything I had endured. My husband leaving had broken my heart, but Monica and Isaac's betrayal had shaken me to my core. They had exploited my vulnerability, mocked my pain, and discarded me when I no longer served their purpose. It hurt more than I could put into words, but amidst the pain, a new feeling began to emerge: anger. Not the kind of anger that consumes you, but the kind that fuels you. They don't get to define me. They don't get to win. The next morning, I made a list of priorities. First, I needed a job, something to give me stability and a sense of purpose. I combed through online postings, sending out resumes and filling out applications. It wasn't easy. My confidence had taken a hit, and every rejection email felt like a blow. But I kept pushing forward. I reminded myself of who I used to be before all of this: strong, capable, determined. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. A week later, I landed a job as a receptionist at a small local business. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was a start. The first time I received my paycheck, I stared at it for a long moment, tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It represented my first step toward independence. With a job secured, I focused on finding a place to live. I couldn't afford much, but I found a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. It was far from perfect. The walls were scuffed and the furniture was secondhand. But when I walked through the door for the first time, I felt a sense of ownership I hadn't felt in months. This was my space, my sanctuary. No one could take it away from me. As the days turned into weeks, I began to rebuild not just my life, but also myself. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the pages. Writing became my therapy, a way to process everything I had been through. I reflected on the lessons I'd learned, not just about others, but about myself. My husband leaving taught me that love isn't always enough, and that sometimes people will walk away no matter how much you give. Monica and Isaac's betrayal taught me that not everyone who claims to care about you has your best interests at heart. But most importantly, these experiences taught me that I am stronger than I ever imagined. I had survived the loss of love, home, and trust, and I was still standing. One day, as I was organizing my tiny apartment, I found a box of old photographs tucked away in my suitcase. Among them was a picture of Monica and Isaac, taken during a dinner party years ago. I stared at their smiling faces, feeling a pang of anger and sadness. But instead of tearing the photo or throwing it away, I placed it back in the box. They were part of my story, but they didn't define it. I refused to give them that power. The more I focused on myself, the more I began to see glimpses of the person I used to be. I started going for morning walks, breathing in the crisp air and letting it fill my lungs with new energy. I reached out to old friends I had lost touch with, reconnecting with people who genuinely cared about me. Slowly, my world began to feel less lonely. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about the future. For so long, I had been consumed by the past, by heartbreak, betrayal, and loss. But now, I felt something different. Hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face it. They had tried to break me. My husband, Monica, Isaac. They had all played their part in tearing me down. But in their attempts to destroy me, they had unknowingly given me something invaluable, the opportunity to rebuild myself stronger than before. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I whispered to myself, they thought they had broken me, but they only made me stronger. I reclaimed my life, and I'll never let anyone cross those lines again.